Hello students, today we are going to do day 2 of your notes. This includes about 10 slides on how do ecosystems respond to changing conditions. To start, you're going to complete the bell ringer. The bell ringer is day 2 bell ringer, and it says make a KWL chart using the handout provided. So here's an example. So the K represents what no, okay? The W represents what, and then L represents learn, new information you have learned. So you're going to start by creating a chart. So what you're going to do is list the things that you know about ecosystems already. So maybe that's key terms, maybe that's some definitions of some words. Next, you're going to write down what you would like to know but don't know yet, and then finally at the end you're gonna add some new information you have learned. So you're going to complete this as we progress throughout this presentation. So let's get started. So throughout this presentation, you're going to understand how species composition of a community or ecosystem can change, and you're also going to be able to recognize that living systems are sustained through constant change. Some of the key words we're going to cover throughout this unit are listed here, and again, if you go back and are preparing for a test, make sure that you understand vocabulary in science. You have to know the definitions of the terms, or you're not going to have a whole lot of success on the assessment. So start with vocabulary and develop that vocabulary into a true understanding of the concepts. So to get started, we're going to be talking about what's called succession, or ecological succession. So there are types and numbers of species in a biological community and ecosystem actually change very often, and they change because the environment is constantly changing. So those conditions can be extreme, like fires, volcanic eruptions, climate change, or clearing of forests for planting crops. But there's also normal gradual changes in communities as well. So these things occur naturally, but those gradual replacements or gradual change in the species that make up a community is called ecological succession. So make sure you recognize that when we talk about species, students often have this mind that's focused on animals only. But when we talk about species here, we're also talking about plants, fungi, protists, right? All of the kingdoms of life, all of the domains that are involved within the ecosystem. So there are two major types of succession that we're going to be looking at. So there's primary ecological succession and secondary ecological succession. So let's look at primary ecological succession first. So primary ecological succession is the gradual establishment of communities of different species in mostly lifeless areas. So this is going to occur if there was never life there before. So primary ecological succession begins where there's no soil in the terrestrial ecosystem or no bottom sediment in an aquatic ecosystem. So some examples of where primary ecological succession would take place include like a newly cooled lava after a volcanic eruption. There was never any type of anything living there. It's fresh, brand new rock that has to develop and has to grow new things eventually. An abandoned highway or a parking lot, some newly created reservoir or shallow pond, bare rock exposed from maybe a retreating glacier. So what you can see over here in our picture is that over a period of time, we start with bare rock, and with primary succession, we eventually progress over a period of time to a climax community. Now, there are species early on in these areas. Those species are called pioneer species. They're pioneers because they're the first species to actually inhabit the ecosystem, so that bare rock. Now, those organisms, through seasonal or climate change, you're going to have those things growing and dying and growing and dying. And as that happens, those organisms are going to start to mix into the eroded rock and start to create a very, very poor base of soil. But as that occurs and develops over time, you're going to see that those soil layer starts to build up over time, and it can sustain more and more plants. And eventually, over a long period of time, we're able to get to what's called climax community. So primary succession takes a long time because we're starting with bare rock. You're starting with nothing and growing eventually an entire ecosystem. Secondary succession happens more common because, in these areas, we don't have a whole lot of areas that are unexplored. So those areas for primary succession are quickly developed and become ecosystems. So any disturbance after that makes it secondary succession. So this is the more common type of ecological succession. And secondary ecological succession is when communities or ecosystems with different species actually develop in places containing soil or bottom sediment that's there already. So in this example, it begins in an area where the ecosystem has been disturbed or destroyed, but there's soil in place. So if we want to break these two down and make this pretty easy to remember, primary succession, it starts with bare rock. Secondary succession, there's already soil in place from an ecosystem that existed previously, but that it was destroyed. So now this is the second ecosystem that gets to, and it could be well over the second ecosystem, but just to help you kind of make those connections, it's at least the second ecosystem that has established that area. So examples would be burned or cut forests, heavily polluted streams, floodland, and even abandoned farmland, which that's often referred to as old field succession. And driving through a countryside, you can spot that quite easily. So a little bit more on ecological succession. So over the past several decades, a different picture of succession has begun to emerge. So ecological succession doesn't always follow this predictable path, and it's actually really complex and diverse. And as we look at the progression of succession, we are understanding that it leads to more complex, diverse, and sustainable ecosystems. So the further along an ecosystem is, the more complex and diverse it becomes. So when you look closely at terrestrial ecosystems, those ecosystems tend to reveal continual change. So think of forests really as ecosystems, more of any changing patchwork of vegetation. They're basically all in different stages of ecological succession. So if you look at the picture provided here, you can see that there's a lot of different things going on in this complex ecosystem. So ecosystems are super complex. So living systems basically are going to arrive from this constant change. So living systems come from complex processes that result in some degree of stability over time, and that's known as sustainability. And that's really the goal of environmental science, is to get us to a point, us as in the Earth, to where we could sustain our human population indefinitely. So that's not a track that we're on right now, but it's something that we as humans need to work towards. So the resources are available for many generations to come, or indefinitely. So in this example, a mature tropical rainforest, some trees die, other trees take their places. So unless the forest is cut, burned, or otherwise destroyed, you're still going to recognize it as a tropical rainforest at 50 or even 100 years later. So there are two aspects of stability in ecosystem. One is called ecological inertia. The other one is ecological resilience. So we're going to explore those on the next slide. So ecological inertia or persistence is the ability of the ecosystem to actually be able to survive those disturbances that may occur. So some ecosystems might not be able to survive a disturbance, especially if they're not well developed. So ecological resilience is the ability of an ecosystem to be restored through secondary ecological succession after a severe disturbance. So having resilience for an ecosystem is a good thing. That means they're going to be able to restore the ecosystem after a severe disturbance. So evidence shows that some ecosystems have one or the other, but not both. So tropical rainforests, for example, have high species diversity and high inertia and are resistant to low levels of change or damage. However, once a large tract of rainforest is cleared or damaged, the resilience of the degraded forest ecosystem may be so low that it reaches a tipping point and it's not able to then recover and become what it once was as a tropical rainforest. So here are some questions that your teacher may ask you to submit. So please make sure you take some time to answer these. Feel free to pause the video, go back and forth to explore some of these definitions or slides as you progress through this. You can also reference your student notes if you filled them out as we went. That concludes the end of Day 2 notes. I hope you found this helpful.